Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
We appreciate it. You know, you bring a really unique perspective being a former ambassador to the United States. You straddle both Mexico and the United States. So I have two words for you: the wall. Conjures up a lot of emotion.
It does.
What are the biggest misconceptions with the wall?
Well, look, for starters, it is clear that Mexico, whether it's the government that I served or this government or the previous government, have to be careful, because how the United States deals with its border security issues is a sovereign decision of the United States. I think the wall is the wrong way to approach national security issues for a number of reasons. It's a first century BC solution to 21st century challenges. And if you look at some of the dynamics that the wall is supposedly there to solve, like, for example, illicit drugs, the great majority of the drugs aren't crossing between ports of entry. So you can build a wall from shining sea to shining sea. So what you do need to do is beef up your capabilities in the ports of entry, that you can have non-intrusive technology to be able to inspect the $1.4 billion of trade that come back and forth over the border every day. And that's where you can move the needle. You're not going to move the needle by building a wall between one port of entry and another port of entry across the desert, because most of the drugs are not coming through the desert. They're coming with trade and with cargo and with cars and with trucks across ports of entry. So if the US wants to spend $25 billion on building a wall, that's the United States sovereign decision. It's not going to change the dynamics of security-related issues on the border. And in Mexico, it is perceived as a very aggressive move by the US government. You don't have to be, again, a rocket scientist to figure out why, in the last 2 years of the Trump administration, Mexico is the country where the favorable perceptions of the United States have fallen the most of any country in the world. From 67% favorable perceptions of the United States at the end of the Obama administration to 17% favorable perceptions of the United States a few months ago.
The wall's not up yet, though. It's been 2 years.
Oh, no.
Has that view changed in Mexico?
No, I think it continues to deepen these types of perceptions. I've always said that one of the great achievements in the US-Mexico bilateral relationship since NAFTA was that we slowly started changing the hearts and minds of Americans and Mexicans as to understanding how these two countries are uniquely important to each other's security, prosperity, and well-being. Mexico's success is the US's success, and vice versa. And in many ways, I think the legacy that I'm most troubled by of the Trump administration so far is that he has moved the clock back in terms of having Mexicans and Americans understand that they both need to be co-stakeholders to each other's success.
You mentioned drugs. Some people bring up guns. They bring up the people crossing in.
Well, the guns actually go in the other direction.
That is true.
The guns go from the US into Mexico simply because of straw purchases and gun shows and gun shops and the lack of background checks, and because Mexico does not have gun stores. Many people in the US don't know that you can't buy a gun in a Walmart in Mexico. It's forbidden. Mexicans don't have Second Amendment rights. And so you don't have to be, again, a Nobel laureate to figure out why there are more gun shops along the border with Mexico in US states than Walmarts.
Long-term studies reveal that the number of people crossing over from Mexico is less than it was back in the early 2000s. According to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, most illegal immigration occurs by people overstaying their visa. President Trump has responded by proposing tariffs on the exports of one of his top trading partners, Mexico.
What about the issue of immigration And the fact that the Trump administration has tried to tie tariffs and the threat of tariffs in hoping to get the president to slow the flow of migrants from Central America through.
Look, you're not going to enforce your way out of a migration crisis. The issues that are driving Central American transmigration through Mexico on its way to the United States are related to, on the one hand, public insecurity and violence, particularly in Honduras and El Salvador, the impact of profound climate pattern changes, particularly in Guatemala, and the impact that is having on rural economic, a rural economic exodus north towards the United States. So the only way you're really going to move the needle in terms of bringing down the flow of Central American migrants coming through Mexico on their way to the United States is through a holistic, long-term approach to rebuild institutions, resilience, public security, and economic opportunities in Central America. And that's going to take us, if we do our job right, and I say our because Mexico and the United States and others have to do this together. If we get this right, it's going to take us a generation to solve. In the meantime, what you do.
It sounds like Mexico has been doing quite a bit. I mean, the numbers are down.
Mexico has been doing a bit. Numbers are down. Climate has had an impact because of the summer. Numbers tend to diminish in the summer simply because of the heat. But yes, Mexico has been doing its part to diminish those flows. I would say at a very high diplomatic and political and image cost for Mexico with Central American nations, with NGOs and multilateral organizations that are rightly worried that what Mexico has done is adopt a migration policy paradigm that isn't Mexico's, it's Trump's. And obviously what Trump did by threatening to link two very separate issues, trade and migration, seems to have worked because, unfortunately, the Mexican government did blink. I was one who at the time was saying the Mexican government should not blink. Why? Because if you're going to slap tariffs on Mexican exports to the United States, you're going to create a boomerang effect. Why? Because one of the success stories behind NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, over these past 20 years, is that it has created joint supply and production chains in North America. What does this mean? This means that out of every dollar of Mexican exports to the United States, 40 cents are of US content. So if you follow what I'm trying to get to is, if you slap 5, 10, 15, 20% tariffs on Mexican exports, you're slapping those same tariffs on 40 cents of US content that go into every single Mexican export coming into the United States. So I was one who said, we shouldn't blink. We should call his bluff. We should call President Trump's bluff, because it will be US consumers and US businesses who will start pushing back on the president saying, you can't do this. Mexico is the #1 largest trading partner of the United States. We've got 75,000 trucks that reach our border in both directions on any given day. We've got 1 million legal crossings across the border every single day. That density of trade and economic relationships collapses if in both directions if Trump slaps those tariffs. But he did that. He threatened punitive tariffs. Mexico blinked. Mexico has been working to bring down those numbers. I do believe that Mexico has a responsibility to work hand in hand with the United States, because there's one very important premise that needs to be observed to ensure the success in such a complex relationship and such an asymmetrical relationship as the one that exists between Mexico and the United States, and that is shared responsibility. We need the support of the United States, for example, to take on organized crime by helping Mexico stop the flow of guns and bulk cash that feed organized crime in Mexico. We need to work with the United States to lessen the flow of drugs or smuggling organizations moving people up north. The only way that this relationship works is if both countries adopt this paradigm of shared responsibility. So Mexico does have to improve its operational control of its southern border, but my criticism is that it has to do it within a frame that is its own and not a migration policy that is being imposed with, by the way, no quid pro quo from the United States.
Well, the Trump administration wants Mexico to do even more.
Yes, they do. And Mexico has clearly said, I think rightly so, that Mexico will not become a safe third country as the U.S. administration has sought Mexico to sign a safe third country agreement.
According to experts, it would be logistically impossible to close the entire U.S. southern border. This would require more border patrol, but the Department of Homeland Security has been suffering from personnel shortages. Plus, there is the economic impact. The two countries have increased their two-way trade from $81.4 billion in 1993 to $557.6 billion in 2017.
Where do you think this relationship stands at the moment?
If you look at perceptions on both sides of the border as to each country, if you look at what is happening in specific areas of the bilateral relationship that are more or less stalled, you start to get concerned about where this could go. The relationship has shown great resilience, which I think is a testament to what has been built so far. But if you look at the presidential discourse, and if you realize that President Trump will continue to use Mexico as a piñata for electoral political reasons heading into the general election next year in 2020, we're facing some very challenging and dicey months ahead.
Ambassador Sarukhan, thank you so much for
pleasure.
joining us.
My pleasure.